name, sir?
Terracino.
Okay. Can you please tell us the name of your film and what it's about?
Sure. My film is Elliot Loves. It's the closing night film for the Dominican Film Festival. We debuted on the festival circuit a year ago, but this is only our second time in New York. We were already bought by HBO, so we're going to be on HBO Latino all this summer. And it's a coming-of-age story about a Dominican-American kid at two stages of his life, as a 9-year-old and as a 21-year-old.
Okay, great. We'd like to expand a little more. You don't want to ruin the...
Yeah, I don't want to ruin anything.
Oh, you don't want to... Okay.
No, the film won a bunch of awards on the festival circuit. We debuted a year ago down in Miami. I guess maybe kind of a gay-themed film. I think. I'm not sure that it's gay-themed technically, but the lead character is gay. And we've shown it all over the world, in the Dominican Republic, in Italy, in Ireland, in Wales. And now, as our festival run ends, we're coming back in New York, which I think is fantastic, to kind of end the festival run in New York City, because we shot the film in New York City.
Oh, that's great. That's fantastic. I mean, what do you think you can get from being here at the second annual Dominican Film Festival, and how can this help your product?
Sure. There are very few Latino film festivals in the United States. It's crazy to think that most cities don't have Latino film festivals. So film festivals are always initially, it's always the key way of reaching your audience, because 1 or 2 or 3 or 500 or 1,000 people come out and they talk about it, and they Facebook about it, and they tweet about it. So we haven't had many outlets for Latino film festivals to reach to Latino audiences. We did play the HBO New York International Latino Film Festival. We were bought by HBO Latino. But when you think of how disparate the Latino audience is, there's Mexicans and Dominicans and Cubans and Puerto Rican, and Cubans in Miami aren't like Mexicans in LA, and they're not exactly like Dominicans and Puerto Ricans in New York. So you really have to do the individual outreach. So being in the Dominican Film Festival in New York is another way of reaching Latinos in New York City. Because Latinos, you can't just say, oh, I did this one thing and that went out to all Latinos, because the audience isn't like that.
Right.
So you have to keep coming back and trying to connect with the audience.
Can we talk a little bit about your background, growing up, your family background, and origins, etc.?
Sure. I'm Dominican and Italian. My dad was born in New York. His family was born in Italy. My mom was born and raised in Santo Domingo. Her family came here in the 50s. My grandmother still lives between the DR and New York City. And I grew up in the city and in the suburbs. Not really bilingual. I grew up as like a very Americanized kid. And because my mother, being an immigrant in the 50s, thought that children, if you have children here, they have to be American. You know what I mean? So I growing up in the 80s, as I did, it was a different time from how a lot of Latinos grow up now, because they grew up bilingual. They grew up going back and forth between Puerto Rico and New York, or the DR and New York. And I grew up in a time when it was like, if you were the child of immigrants, you had to be Americanized. So the film is also an exploration of my heritage and that culture.
So growing up, do you think, well, I think you kind of hinted on it, but do you feel that it was perhaps more difficult growing up and trying to say the fact that I'm Hispanic or Latino, as opposed to now, growing up here?
I mean, I do think it's a little easier now, because, when I was going to high school in the 80s and when I went to college and university in the early 90s, there was still no understanding of Hispanic or Latino. The United States, until recently, was very black-white. Those were the, you were white or you were black. And in the 80s and 90s, there was no understanding of Dominican. We didn't use the term Latino. And I don't think that Latinos had the solidarity with each other that we have now. You know what I'm saying? And then when you look at, say, Obama being re-elected in 2012, what was everybody talking about the day after the election was the Latino vote. And that dialogue wasn't going on when I was younger. To be Latino, it meant you had to be Americanized. You kind of had to bury your culture a bit and fit in. And there are pros to that, but there are cons as well. And now I think we're in a time where you can be Latino and still succeed as an American. You don't need to bury anything.
Right. Wow, great. I mean, I'm very appreciative of you actually mentioning this, because it's a point of view that you don't really get often or hear often. And it's great to hear, someone who lived through it, etc. Now, in terms of your mother. Can you speak a little bit more about her and perhaps her time maybe adjusting here? Did she integrate? Did she assimilate into U.S. American culture? Or
Well, my mother herself assimilated very well, but coming to this country from the DR in the 50s was very difficult. So my mom and her brothers and sisters all came here at different times, and some, like relatives in Chicago, had to sponsor, like her sister. Relatives in New York sponsored her. It was they couldn't come over en masse. They couldn't come over as a family. So her family was kind of permanently broken up. That was the only way they could get here. And that definitely was traumatic for her.
okay. Oh, thank you so much. Is there perhaps anything else that you may want to add to close the interview, or a message for the young artists, filmmakers, actors, directors?
I think the most important message is that we're finally at a time when a Latino artist can succeed and still be Latino, where they don't have to bury who they are or change their name or sell out. And so I think this is a really exciting time to be a Latino artist, in part because of festivals like this.